Hello, BookTube. Well, as you can see, I have a guest, not just any guest, Micah Cummins, who's not only talked
Hello.
on my channel with me a few times, but also is my partner in a book club, in a read-along of two that we did for the month of February, our ill-advised inaugural book club of Essex Dogs by Dan Jones, which was ill-advised because we're both, 20-something guys. You know how that can be. We impetuously picked this book, even though it wasn't out in America until Valentine's Day.
15 days or
Yeah,
14 days after we started.
just the kind of book club you want. here's a book club you can't join.
You can't read it.
But the moment the pub date came and went, I haven't actually checked um, figures, very preliminary figures to see if this book is doing as well in America as it did in the UK. But it's out now, and quite a few of you joined in, and we thought we would discuss it a bit here at the end of our month before we leap into next month's buddy read, which is 3 times as long.
Yeah.
And our discussion is going to be a little lopsided because I have seen Band of Brothers and Micah has not. I have read 100 books on the 100 Years' War and Micah has not. And I was there in the 100 Years' War. I married Deb at the beginning of it, and I married Deb at the end of it. And Micah was not. So we're going to try and overcome that.
Yes.
And the way that I want to overcome it is by asking you what you made of this book. You enjoyed it. Everyone who has read it enjoyed it. It's just so incredibly readable.
It is.
But I want to ask you, given those three disclaimers, did you ever feel like you were missing anything?
I didn't. I felt that I was sort of walked through any extra history I needed to know. I felt that it was very well explained, but then also it didn't seem to rely incredibly heavily on historical data.
No, it really doesn't, does it?
It seemed very much that this is a story. It's set loosely in a historical period, but it does not rely on the reader at all to know anything beyond, okay, we're in the 14th century. Okay, we are in France. Our main characters are Englishmen. Let's go.
Right. Let's go.
There are historical figures. We have Edward III. We have his son. We have, so historical figures that, most readers will loosely know, particularly the British audience. But there's no moment where you're lost and you're thinking, what is this event he's referencing? What is this, that apparently I should know about? That never happens.
Yeah, I always wonder if part of the popularity of this book in the UK isn't that this is it's a really bucking up story to read if you're born and raised.
Absolutely.
It's but there's an element here. You're right. You don't ever feel that way because there's an element of standard historical fiction. You've read some historical fiction.
I have.
An element of standard historical fiction that you encounter so ubiquitously that you don't even think about it. You just expect it. And that is the info dump. And there aren't any in this book.
No.
It takes you about 100 pages to realize that that's the thing you haven't encountered in this
right.
book.
I was expecting it. I mean, it started out really strong. I was sucked in immediately. And like you said, I was sort of cautiously waiting for, okay, where's all the info dump?
There's always a moment where it happens. Even I'm not saying that it's necessarily bad. It always happens, and it doesn't happen in this book. Right when you get to the point where you think that it will, usually because we've met a high-ranking bishop or a nobleman who's leading the English effort, right when you get to that moment, they open their mouths and they are every bit as contextual as our heroes. They aren't there to dump exposition on you at all, and yet
it's historical fiction as far as it's taking place during an actual period of time. But other than that, it's just a story.
But you didn't feel like you were missing anything.
No,
by those info dumps not being there.
I didn't, just because of I think of the way that it's structured, and the way that the narrative is presented. You don't have to know anything at all going into it.
I was curious to know, especially when I was finishing up this book, I was curious to know, okay, you haven't seen Band of Brothers. You should fix that. But
I should.
And I'm assuming you haven't read the Saxon Tales of Bernard Cornwell?
I have read a little bit of them. And
Uhtred, son of Uhtred?
You have sent them to me now, so I will be reading them.
Oh, okay.
Over the course of the next couple of months.
I think that Dan Jones watched Band of Brothers very slowly with his finger on the pause button. And I'm pretty sure that, I mean, those Saxon Chronicles, Uhtred, son of Uhtred, and his fighting men hang over this book like Banquo's ghost. I think those are very noticeable influences on here, but you have read some. I mean, didn't you participate in Garb August?
I did a very small amount, and I will be fully participating this year.
So you have read some, let's say, fiction that relies on the whole gimmick of an embattled group of guys.
Yes.
You've certainly seen movies where there's an embattled group of guys, whether it's
very common sort of.
Yeah, it's a very common thing. Right. So I mean, you can't have been far along in this book before you realize this book is entirely that. It's entirely
absolutely.
So
just
were you making
the first couple of pages?
Were you making predictions based on that? Because that gimmick is very predictable.
It is. I was to some extent, but then also I was trying to go in just with a very clear mind, just to just reading what was given and trying not to do too much sorting out or figuring out, and just let's just see what happens. Let Dan Jones do what he wants to do here, and I'll just be the willing.
Right. I felt the same way, but when what you want to do is so intensely stereotypical, I feel like I'm not being unfair to the writer.
Right.
I start to think about the stereotype.
That's interesting that you would bring that up. I think that feeling that you're describing right now is the difference between you having read, hundreds, thousands, possibly, of books with that gimmick versus me not having read as many.
Well,
you
and also movies.
Go in right away seeing where it's going to go.
I drew up a list of the Essex Dogs. And I looked at that list just by their names. I made a list of their names before I knew anything about them. Just by their names, I said, all right, well, I know what the hero's like. And the hero will be all-purpose, all things to all people, and better, more valiant, smarter, more broad-pictured than anything else, more compassionate underneath his hard exterior, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then I went through all the other stereotypes. The dewy newcomer who has a secret, the seeming screw-up who is going to save the day, the Tower of Strength who doesn't say much and is meant to get the audience on his side and cheering. I even went through the list of Essex Dogs in order to guess ahead of time which of them would die.
Interesting.
Because one always dies.
Solely based off of name.
Solely based off of names. I have to say, I was right. Because the name of the guy in the group who is going to die, it sounds so terrible. I'm meaning to praise. I like this book. But the name of the guy in the group who's going to die phonetically sounds the same from story to story. From story
really?
Or yes, unbelievably. But yeah,
interesting.
The name
really fascinating.
Sounds the same. If you compare
the name out loud. And you heard, okay.
If you say it out loud, you will almost certainly know. If you say the names out loud of the Essex Dogs and compare them, even if you haven't read 1,000 books like this, compare them to movies. Compare them to the original Predator. Compare them to Aliens 2. Compare them to half a dozen John Wayne movies. The names they rhyme.
That's so interesting.
I have to think that it's intentional. But I was right. I was absolutely right as to which Essex Dog dies. I knew it in every scene that he was in.
Yeah.
I kept thinking, well, you're doomed. So
counting down the scenes. That's really fascinating. But that has to be intentional. That can't all just be.
But even though you haven't, all right, maybe you haven't read as much similar stuff here. Were there any parts of this that you enjoyed it? I did too. We flew right through it. Everybody who's been emailing me has been saying, strengths or weaknesses notwithstanding, this is the definition of an unput-downable book.
Absolutely.
But did any of it strike you as too predictable or a little bit dumb? If you want to say generalities, if we want to keep this spoiler-free, we want to talk just in generalities.
I don't want to say dumb. I didn't ever find it dumb, but there were certainly moments that I found formulaic, or where sort of when a scene started, I was basically already at the end of the scene when I started, or at the end of the chapter when I started, just based off of just sort of understanding understanding the level. The writing is not complicated, the story is not complicated, but it's good, and it's written well. But it's not a it's not a book where you have to put a lot of brain power in. Everything is sort of presented to you.
Right.
So in that way, it's simple. But I never found it. I never found it dumb. I did find it simple, though.
No, and we should. I mean,
but not trashy.
We should make pains to point out that there is a difference between those two things, right? There's a difference between a book being dumb and a book being written in a way that means you don't have to really work your brain. Those two things are not the same thing.
Right. I agree.
The first one can be done accidentally, and the second one can't be. Right. And we know, just from reading Dan Jones's history, that the decision to make his book one in which you do not have to work your brain very hard had to be conscious. He had to be working at that the whole time.
Absolutely.
I'd love to know from him how many exposition dumps he took out of this thing.
Right.
Because and then realize
his nonfiction will know that he has a lot of info dumps in his nonfiction.
He's very good at it, but he definitely does.
And he does not shy away from immense info dumps. So it had to be intentional. And like you said, you don't accidentally write a well-written, simple book.
No,
you accidentally write dumb stuff all the time.
That's what always bothers me about literary snobs, when they get to something that's a genuine page turner and they think, oh, okay, so I'm at the bottom of the barrel. I always want to say to them, try it. Try writing it yourself. I'm not saying that you should try writing it for 300 pages. I'll bet you $1,000 you can't do it for 3 pages.
Right.
Or 30 pages, much less a whole book.
Taking a story, simplifying it as far as possible, distilling it down as far as possible, and then making it interesting.
Yes, a writer,
but not making it feel that you are talking down to your reader or somehow stooping to their idiotic level, that they don't understand everything about the subject like you do.
I talked to a writer who's years and years and years ago. I talked to a writer whose name came up quite often on Garb August, and over wine and calzones, we were talking about his books, and I mentioned there are no passages like that in your books. The passages the term expo dump, info dump didn't exist then, but I mentioned you never do that. You never have passages where you go on and on like that. And when we named his 2 competitors. And I said, there must be some sort of editorial wizardry involved in that. And he looked at me over the rim of his wine cup and said, yes, there is editorial wizardry involved. I take out those passages. And I said, oh, yeah, so you take them out, rework them to be nice and leaner. And he said, nope, I take out those passages.
Take them out completely.
Dan Jones learned what writers have learned for forever and ever, which is that the secret to info dumps is that you don't need them. If you're telling a good story, you don't need them.
Right. Or if you're telling it in such a way.
But if you don't have those info dumps, okay, so you were reading this book and there wasn't anything like that, and you never felt like you were missing anything, and you catapulted along from chapter to chapter. But now that you're done with the book, I'm wondering if the one element that info dumps usually strengthen in a book is a feeling of immersion in a different time period.
Right.
I'm wondering if you feel like you got any of that in this book.
I think there was a little bit, but not a whole lot. And that would probably be my one negative feeling towards the book, is just that because of the lack of information surrounding the period, it did not necessarily feel like I was in, the 14th century.
Right.
The story elements itself, having references to the king, references to the Battle of Crécy, the invasion of France, things that I know, that gave me the sense of what period of time I was in. But even things like dialogue between characters is written in such a way that it feels very much 21st century.
Very much, yes.
Very much so. So the characters' interaction and the characters' mannerisms even feel very modern and very present day. And so to that extent, I did not feel the time period that we were set in, which wasn't a bad thing. It was still enjoyable, but it definitely was sort of a removal from from the period in which it was set.
It was one of the things that annoyed me the most about the book, is that the characters are explicitly 21st century. And I thought maybe I was the only one really being bothered by that. I talked to a friend of mine in the UK who read this months before I did, and we were sort of assessing it from 30,000 feet. And he smiled at me and said, yeah, it's an incredibly gutsy, warts and all evocation of the experience of English fighting forces on the ground in Afghanistan. Yeah, okay, well, that's absolutely true. You could hand an AK.
That's a good way to put it.
Lovejoy and his men, and it wouldn't change a thing. It wouldn't change a single thing.
Which you have to wonder if maybe to some extent that was intentional, of trying to make it more accessible to the modern reader. Sure, I'm just going to drop modern dialogue.
The only problem that I have with it is that it works by telling a lie, and that, I mean, if you're a novelist, that's going to be your stock and trade anyway. But the lie involved is that was true. Whereas the Essex Dogs would not have acted this way. They would not have sounded this way. It's so anachronistic that it gets predictable.
Even beyond dialogue, moments of just interpersonal interaction.
Yeah,
I found very modern.
All very 21st century
thought processes,
cynicism.
Right.
And also, also, this is a little bit of a touchy point. We don't have to dwell on it. But the 21st century, I'm going to make a sweeping pronouncement here. I should give the disclaimer that Micah is not involved in my sweeping.
No.
The 21st century in the West is atheist. It is simply atheist. Even devoutly religious people act, think, and move about the world as though they were atheists. And I would argue that, polls notwithstanding, in the 21st century in the West, I would argue that virtually everybody is functionally an atheist. And all of the characters in this book are, including the clerics. And none of them would have been. None of them would have been.
That's a point that I noticed as well. I'm glad you brought that up, of the religious aspect. I think there would be
much more prominent, right?
Much more prominent. Right. I mean, we have clerics, members of the church, bishops, what have you, represented in this book that are not at all religious.
No,
in any way, shape, or form.
You're going one after another of them. You always want to take them aside and say, you are aware that you're in the middle of a schism right now.
Right. You would be much more passionately involved in what you were doing.
Right down to the interpersonal stuff. I mean, if an Essex dog comes across a superior, unless it's the Earl of Northampton, who is my favorite character in this book, I have to admit, it's pretty easy. He's a pretty easy favorite character. But see, I want to reference the John Wayne movies here, but you won't know what I'm talking about. There was a character actor that the director John Ford used over and over again in John Wayne movies. He was in all kinds of John Wayne movies, and you like him. You end up liking him most in the movie, even though Wayne is the hero and all the action's on him. And I wish that Victor McLaughlin could be alive so that he could play the Earl of Northampton, because he would be perfect for the part. Absolutely perfect for the part here. Whereas Lovejoy is obviously John Wayne. That's what I mean to say, is that these patterns don't ever change.
They hold true to their character type.
Except that John Wayne would have insisted in introducing an element of piety. None of our characters are pious in any way.
No.
And when an Essex dog meets a higher up, if the higher up isn't the Earl of Northampton, if it's somebody else, they will say, well, I guess it's an impossible task. We'll just have to do it or die. That happens a couple of times, that an Essex dog says that to a toff, basically. And the toff says, well, you might be going to do it and die, but I'm going to die in bed with my wife beside me. And it's not meant as sarcasm. It's meant that you're just supposed to see, all right, so you're a one-dimensional fop. You're over here just for the plunder. But it's the ordinary everyday men that will do the fighting and dying. Just got a little bit old. I've got a little bit old.
Yes.
That element.
I agree.
But maybe you have a point. Maybe it got a little old to me because I've seen a lot more of it.
That is what I'm wondering, because being exposed to so much, you sort of you can almost go in knowing exactly what's going to take place. And so it's already old for you.
So have you read any of Dan Jones's history? Quite a few people who read.
I have read his the Plantagenets,
Oh,
War of the Roses, and I'm trying to remember.
There was one other.
There's one other. I'm thinking maybe
a lot of history.
Maybe his book on the peasant revolts. Can't remember the title.
And
yes, I read 3.
You liked his history. You find it very readable.
I did. I found it very readable. I found it very sort of tilting towards narrative nonfiction, which makes it very readable. Certainly more dense than his fiction writing, which I thought was interesting. Again, an intentional choice on his part, I'm assuming, to sort of simplify the density in his fiction to make it more accessible. Because he does not write the same in fiction that he does in nonfiction. And I know it's different genres.
Yeah.
But even just the tone in his nonfiction, it's still, I mean, his nonfiction still isn't academic necessarily.
No, not at all.
It's still very popular history. But it does require something of the reader.
If you have the paperback of his Plantagenet volume, it will have a very sexy blurb on it. Attesting.
If you have the paperback, I'll have to look.
Because I am in the homes of every reader. So it's very, very creepy. Your shelves have my name printed on them.
Hey, I've looked through my books and I've tried to find as many as I can.
I always have to feel a little sympathy. I think about, Stephen Runciman or Christopher Tyerman, all these people who wrote gigantic, extremely ponderous, well-researched books on the Crusades. Dan Jones writes his book on the Crusades, and it's got a readership that just dwarfs all of those put together, because people can pick up a Dan Jones history and think, I'm not excluded from this.
Right.
This is involving me. It's telling me just enough that I need to know, and it's keeping the story moving forward. But so you've read at least 3 books by Dan Jones. Did anything going into this surprise you?
The main thing that surprised me was so the lack of historical context did surprise me.
Lack of history. Kind of
I was expecting, I was expecting to start this book saying, I don't know much about the 100 Years' War. Let's get some fictional takes on this event. And then I remember finishing the book saying, I don't know a lot about the 100 Years' War. Still, I should go read other books. Sort of waiting so I love historical nonfiction. So I was waiting for the info dump. I was waiting for the segment where, okay, we're pulling out slightly from fiction, infusing a bit of nonfiction. We're gonna, get your feet planted within the story, and then we'll pick back up with our characters. Sort of waiting for that moment, which never came, which is okay, and I still enjoyed the reading, but I definitely was expecting more history involved in the historical fiction in this case, just because of the author.
He's very good at orchestrating dialogue and interpersonal scenes. I thought maybe that's how it will happen.
Right.
Sometimes some of the best info dumps in literature.
Right.
That's the other thing. They take place in a dramatic scene, like the banquet scene from Dune, or the Council of Elrond from the Fellowship of the Ring, where the purpose of the chapter is to load you with information, but
it's sort of disguised within
yes,
a personal interchange. But that's the other thing that I noticed with the dialogue and with the conversations. There's not a whole lot of depth anywhere within conversations. Everything is very surface. We don't get any. I shouldn't say we don't get any. We get very slight background stories on our characters as well. Yeah. Occasionally, something's referenced of a relative or a wife or something.
It is very slight. It is very slight.
We don't get any depth on our characters.
Yeah.
Either we sort of see them.
Yeah, that's true. The little bits and pieces that we get of any of the Essex Dogs in the past, or any of the previous adventures of the Essex Dogs as a group, comes because something they've just encountered has spurred a quick memory in Lovejoy's mind.
Right. And it's typically a past experience that was exactly the same.
Right. He sees that thing. He briefly describes what it connotes to him, gives no context, and then moves on.
Right. But we don't get any background as to their younger selves, why they are apart, why they're taking part and what they're taking part in. what led them to that moment, why they aren't doing something else.
So, yes, I know why they aren't doing something else. Crops up right away. Well, you
right,
know,
like, why are they doing this?
It's 40 shillings. You're talking about rowing a boat into a hail of crossbow quarrels.
Right,
There are plenty of
for a
things you
month.
could have done at home for 40 shillings. It wouldn't have cost them.
For a month, right?
Yeah.
A long time for 40 shillings. When there had to have been plenty of other employment elsewhere. It's interesting. Which again, you have to think that was done on purpose to some extent, just to be incredibly readable. You can just drop into the story.
So
and just
you're a fairly type A reader, and yet you were able to put the desire for those info dumps aside and enjoy this for what it was. Do you picture readers out there who will get 30 pages in and say, no, I don't know what's going on, and I want to know what's going on before I go any further, so this book's not for me?
I do think so. I do think that will happen for some readers. I think if I hadn't put aside my desire for more information, that very well could have been me as well. But I wanted to read it. I wanted to find out what was going to happen. So I just sort of set aside the expectation of, okay, I'm going to know what's going on in a detailed sense, and shifted that perspective to, I'm just going to enjoy whatever is given to me and try my best to connect the dots. Again, there are very few dots to connect, but
that's true.
It's enjoyable.
I think
it's not a history. It's not a fictional take on history. It's fiction with a little bit of history.
I think it was very much his goal. I think that when you finish this book, your first thought is not, I want to learn more about the 100 Years' War, but rather, I want to learn more about the Essex Dogs. I want to know their next adventure.
I agree. It's positioned his readers to want that second book.
Can you picture this being filmed?
I think so. I think that it would do very well as a movie with some additions. I think added dialogue that explains characters' past and a little bit of the present would be nice, and a little bit of cleaning up the representation of the time period, making it a little bit more immersive, because you don't get the feeling that we're in the 14th century.
Yeah, you don't get the feeling that you're in an alternate time period at all.
No mentions are made to anything that sort of alludes to the time period.
Right. And the Essex Dogs are ordinary guys. They're ordinary grunts. They're that's stressed to us over and over again. And that's Dan Jones's way of making sure that not only does his narrative not reference larger historical events, and not only do his characters not reference larger historical events, but his characters don't know anything about larger historical events.
No, and
a saint or a holiday comes up and they have no idea what it is. Just like his reader won't know anything about what it is.
Right. So obviously, I think that was done so that the reader feels comfortable reading it. They don't feel left out. They feel like they are on the same level intellectually with the characters. But it also gives a weird feeling of these characters don't seem to know the time in which they are living.
Yes, they don't know the time.
They are not referencing anything pertinent from the century. They are completely withdrawn from their day and age. No and
their superiors often seem to be as well. The earls and the dukes and the
everyone seems sort of in a vacuum where, I mean, talk about the 14th century. You just read with your book club, The Distant Mirror. The 14th century is incredibly packed with momentous historical events, none of which are referenced.
And in A Distant Mirror by Barbara Tuchman, she anchors virtually every expo dump that she does there are thousands of quotes from people living in the time. And it wasn't intentional on my part, but reading this book alongside A Distant Mirror can't help but stress how those people quoted in A Distant Mirror don't sound anything like the characters in this book. And they're not all, the characters quoted in A Distant Mirror aren't all noble people. They're just as, some of them are just as common as these commoners, but they don't sound anything the same. But Zoom tells me that we're running out of time, and it sounds like we're ending this on a negative note, but we don't want to do that, right?
No, we do not.
You would recommend this book?
I absolutely would recommend this. And I have recommended it to a couple people already, and I will continue to. It's a fantastic read. It's easy to read.
Now, do you have a retail bookstore in your area?
I do.
You know whether or not this is positioned? Is it visible in a
I
retail
have not. I have not been since it's been released, so I need to check. I'm assuming. I'm assuming so.
I don't have a big retail bookstore near me because this is Boston, you know, a minor town with no
A
literary.
minor.
We don't
A speck
have
on the map, really.
but I think back on big retail bookstore days, and I think this would have been stacked right in the front of the store with the first thing you see. I wonder if that's the case. But so we want to wrap up here by stressing that we both liked this book.
Absolutely.
We're meaning to kick around some of its limitations, which even limitations feels like the wrong word because these were all conscious choices on the part of the author.
Exactly. That's the thing. It's not limitations. It's decisions.
Yeah, and they take skill to do. So
absolutely,
it's not like he was saying, "Well, I could do this the hard way, or I could do this the easy way." It takes skill to write a book like this. Surely it's no condemnation of an author. It's not fair to condemn an author by saying, "Well, okay, you obviously sat on your couch ahead of time and thought I would like to write like Bernard Cornwell." That's your own choice,
right?
If you make that obvious and your readers can see that and they still buy your book, they can't say they were hoodwinked.
Absolutely not.
And there are effective parts, right? Were you caught up in there's no spoilers here, but there's a whirlwind of violence at the end of this.
There is, yes.
You were caught up in that?
Absolutely. I mean, I read the third part in one sitting.
Oh yeah, just in a gulp. You can't.
Just in a gulp. I took 3 days, 1 day per part. I wanted to space out a little bit, but yeah, I was completely taken up by it.
So you will all enjoy Essex Dogs, all but a handful, a tiny handful of people will say, no, this is just the register of this just isn't for me. But otherwise, you will enjoy it. So our first book club, first read along, our first buddy read, whatever BookTube calls this, was a success.
Absolutely. Aside from the fact that most people couldn't read it for 2 weeks after starting.
But we're fixing that with the next one. Our next choice is Shogun, which you can certainly read. There are copies of it everywhere. Every used bookstore has a copy. Every charity shop has a copy. Every yard sale has a copy. And it's also always reprinted. There's always a new paperback in your bookstores. And there are e-copies. So we're unclear. The challenge for Shogun will not be accessibility.
No.
Either it's 1,000 pages long. It's 1,100 pages long. It's a long book.
It'll be about timing.
Yeah, it'll be about timing. And we'll do just a quarter every week, right?
Absolutely. I think that's the best way to tackle it.
At the end of March, if Micah and I can get our schedules together, we will have another Zoom chat talking about our thoughts about Shogun. And as a special surprise for our viewers, that Zoom chat will be conducted entirely in Japanese.
Absolutely.
So Micah has a little more preparation.
Have a little more prep to do, just a little study.
No, I don't know a word of Japanese either, except that by the time you're done with Shogun, you do know quite a bit.
No. So I will learn it by reading.
A lot of it in the book.
And then we will speak completely in Japanese.
He makes the inspired choice of making the newcomer to medieval Japan not know anything about it. As far as he's concerned, before he gets there, it's a mythological place. He certainly doesn't know the language.
Right.
He's coming to the custom, the language, all of that, just cold. So we are too.
Classic.
You'll all be fine. You'll all be. It's a little bit more reading, and again, Micah and I were acting impulsively, or we might have given a little consideration to the fact that March is kind of full of BookTube events. So we might have been just shorter book instead of long book. But it's March.
But it fits for March of the Mammoth, so it's 1,100 pages. It works perfectly.
All right. Well, let's wrap this up before Zoom cuts me off in mid-sentence. So feel free, all of you who've read Essex Dogs or are reading it now, to let us know what you think.
You do.
And we will be back for the next buddy read. Huge though it is. We are marching with the mammoths together.
Here we go.
All right. Thank you, Micah.
Thank you.